January 2026. A brand new year. And already an extremely embarrassing one. It won't get any better from here, folks. As is typical of this pathetic, cursed decade. Let us talk about the latest fiasco that happened at DBolical. This time, there were two total fiascos, one on ModDB and the other on IndieDB. I won't actually be talking about the IndieDB one in this video. I will instead save that for another follow-up major video. I will also try to shorten this video a bit and try to be somewhat more respectful and less blunt. Since this is the YouTube version, meaning this is the Peace Baby edited version just to comply with YouTube community guidelines and to lighten the bluntness of my usual nature, the full details will be bundled exclusively in the Rumble version, the explicit version. Perhaps I might even make a YouTube short or two later. Although I don't like making them, so no promises. There is a reason why I called this video the Decline of ModDB after all. So it turns out that I was not as very observant of mod imposters pervading the site as I have tried to be. Those of you who have watched my previous, and controversial, video about this matter will know what I mean regarding ModDB's irresponsible nature of granting slides and passes for indie game slop masquerading as mods on the site, be it deliberately or unwittingly. What I used to think was ModDB finally cleaning up their act from the 2021 fiasco of a Mod of the Year awards and put an end to the imposter project trend in general, actually turned out to be the inverse, a concurrent trend of questionable projects. Most commonly mod imposter slop and sometimes piratical slop is still pervading the site, with some of them cheating in annual award events. In 2021, Signal lost 1/4 place on Mod of the Year Player's Choice. Perhaps I was wrong about only 1/3 of the MOTY awards being destroyed. It may have actually been 2/3 of it. In 2022, Signal Lost received a mention in Mod of the Year. In 2023, TimeWarp won Best Overhaul Mod in the Mod of the Year Editor's Choice, and placed 7th in Player's Choice. In 2024, 3 invalid projects received honorable mentions in Mod of the Year Best Upcoming Mod: TimeWarp, Diffusion, and arguably Trenchfoot. The developers still refuse to make an IndieDB page to accommodate their new decision to convert their project into an indie game. For the Mod of the Year Player's Choice would see 2 invalid projects on the honorable mentions, Signal Lost and the Dark Mod. Which were formerly a mod, it has later become standalone and the devs have neglected to make an IndieDB page to accommodate. Finally, in 2025, which was last year, Diffusion placed 2nd in the Mod of the Year Player's Choice category, and Signal Lost won an honorable mention. So what exactly is the problem with these projects? Why are they invalid to ModDB? When you look into the data files of these so-called mods, you should easily notice that something is very off about them. I will go through each of them to elaborate. I will be using this project as examples to dissect and demonstrate. To prove that I am not just some envious wanker but hurt over what won in the Mod of the Year awards, I will also be featuring some projects that are not victors in the recent accolades of this decade, albeit regardless of their mentions, projects that used to be mods, but later turned indie game and just refused to transition accordingly for integrity's sake. First, let's start with the very least offensive ones, like the Dark Mod by Broken Glass Studios. This project did used to be a mod. It released all the way through as a modification for Doom 3 until October 13, 2013, whence it would evolve into a standalone indie game using EE Tech 4. That is fine, Broken Glass. Even fantastic. But why didn't you lot just create an IndieDB page to accommodate your transformation into an indie game? Why are you guys still continuing to operate on the old mod page as a mod? Now somehow I swore I have previously seen an IndieDB page of this project back in the 2010s, around the same time this article was created in 2013. But somehow I cannot find any trace of it. Did these devs actually make the indie page but then had a change in mind and deleted it later? Void if I know, But regardless, this is honestly just unacceptable. They had the rest of that decade to transition, and yet they still lazed around refusing to do so, inviting more confusion to the DBolical website network. Broken glass are, of course, not the only ones. Next, we have Wolfenstein, Blade of Agony, created by Tormenta667. This game also went through an interesting rollercoaster experience. It used to be a Doom 2 mod during their version 1/Chapter 1 release. Then it became a standalone mod relying on Freedom during their version 2/Chapter 2 release. Then finally, it became a fully standalone, ID Tech 1 indie game powered using Doom's IPK3 system, designed ideally for creating standalone indie games that you can also sell on Steam. This is also a fantastic thing to happen from Tormenta and his Blade of Agony development team. Except for the fact they still have neglected to make an indie DD page. There are numerous mods waiting for you guys to hurry up and do that so mod devs can upload their mods and append them to your new game page. Now I think the key reason they ultimately stopped caring to do so was due to the censorship ordeal and the abusive and evil actions of Doomward, effectively doxing him to the German government and federal police and nearly getting him arrested, all because they hate artistic creativity in a World War II fantasy video game that also still respects the historical facts, anecdotes, and relevant yet historically accurate fictitious elements of the timeline. I already explained that in a previous video regarding the broken insanity that is still going on in the modern world. However, I must warn you, if you are of the faint of heart, mind, spine, reproductive organs, and or will, who also cannot handle harsh and brutal, tough love criticism beyond what is in this video, let alone even look beyond the book and its cover and actually listen to the video all the way, from start to finish, before judging prematurely with your opinion, don't bother watching it. Just spare yourself the trouble and myself any incessant drama you may impose upon me. I don't want to hear it. Then again, the developers were even planning to release version 3.2, which will feature online co-op and other special features and secrets, without still even making the IndieDB page for modders to append their mods to their game. So I am unsure if that Doomward subjugation excuse can even hold merit anymore. Shame on you, Tormenta. Next is Paranoia. This used to be a Half-Life mod, and a very great one, albeit confusing due to localization barriers at the time. Or rather, it technically is, on an official note. Here is the catch: as I discovered recently, the mod page allows for the addition of content from users, hence this plus icon existing here for instance. What this means is that any other user, who is not even an official mod developer, can add specialized builds of this project even without the consent of the creators. And this is precisely the case with how Paranoia became standalone here, by an uploader named Wolfenstein. This is personally a relief. At least the official devs are wise to know and understand the difference between a mod and a game. They did follow the rules when they made their sequel Paranoia 2, Savior, a standalone indie game that also has its own respective IndieDB page. The way things should be. However, it seems most of the original creators have just vanished from the internet realm since as early as 2017, with only one of them being active and mainly working on a retro remake for Medal of Honor. Regardless, while I would not entirely blame the official developers for this blatant impostorship happening, or perhaps even necessitate the need to create an IndieDB page, this is still a shady thing for some random idiotic outsider mod dev who is not even directly a part of the official dev team to do, intrude into their project space to upload a standalone game version on a mod page, and further confuse and toy with the masses. The developers honestly need to curate and monitor their mod page for these unusual contributions and curate their project responsibility. I have honestly come to regret DBolical ever adding the community ad feature on any random mod or game now. At the time they did this, it was understandable and justified. Happened at the time Firefront was about to croak an intense summon, a rallying call to action for the ModDB community to actively preserve mods from Firefront before the site eventually drops dead. Important times. Now, it has ironically become a new thread that grants random scumbags the ability to inject slop onto the project pages. The only thing I can blame the PARANOIA team for here is simple negligence, the refusal to carefully curate their community or disable the ability to add content to their mod page when it's getting abused, like now. Strap on your boots because next up. Trenchfoot. Used to be a Doom 2 mod until later on they announced that they will be an indie game on December 2021 just as the MOTY Awards began, of which that tweet they had suddenly disappeared, as if they somehow discovered a video or post of me calling out their disingenuous act. And worst of all, they still have not even created an indie DD page yet. They just really wanna cheat so bad and so hard. Got a love lying to the masses for fame. Now we enter the questionable. I will look into the files of Signal Lost, created by Jane Trace. No, I will not call her a damn lady. Just as the project's page and the README text file in the project's files claim, the data files in this project does not appear to be reliant on Half-Life to run it. This notice implies that they are likely either 1. Impersonating a mod by utilizing the features in Zash 3D used to make a standalone indie game, in a similar way that PARANOIA 2 was made for example, or 2. Are likely pirating the game by illegally distributing the Half-Life game files. Say what you will about abandonware games being given some gray area for this standalone mod nonsense to be tolerable, but Half-Life is not abandonware. It is still being sold by Valve to this day, and I do not think they will be too happy with us pirating their games by hiding their game files inside projects so freely. They are the ones who invented one of the most prolific and reliable DRM systems that works for nearly any video game on their own store after all. Zash 3D pretty much grants a workaround for Gold Source on that regard, which creates a piracy risk when files are prepackaged in the project beyond the owner's requirement to manually do it themselves. Now on the outset, Signal Lost looks like it is of the former mod imposter slop, with its own executable to boot. Problem solved. Right.
Are you sure about that?
You sure about that? You sure about that? You sure about that?
However, this turned out to be a little more tricky than I originally suspected. There is another folder called Backend. This folder seems to feature files that seem to resemble the base Half-Life files that you'd expect from the Valve folder in the official games directory. But then in the Signal Lost folder, there are files that look peculiar, such two-word files, merge_beta and merge_gearbox, as well as suspicious pack0 pack file. I can assume the former were manually created by Jace to bundle Gearbox and Half-Life beta data. I cannot find the latter pack file anywhere in the original Half-Life Steam game folder. However, considering the project claimed to be a reimagining of Half-Life Uplink, this piqued my curiosity and convinced me to install the original tech demo just to verify the files. As it turns out, the original Uplink's files do share similarities with the pack file as well as a few other files. So overall, it appears that this standalone mod is using both the base Half-Life and Half-Life Uplink files. Now, regarding Half-Life Uplink, which is obviously free, I guess one can argue that Portion could legitimize it as some standalone mod of that demo on its own. However, it also seems to be using some of the vanilla Half-Life files as well from the final version of the game. Even when I played the game, some of the assets resembled that from the final version of Half-Life. In this case, I guess I may stand corrected about it possibly being an invalid project. Although there are still concerns of piracy in this project, there is nonetheless a trickster loophole regarding the uplink matter that may very well complicate matters. After all, there are also some other loopholes that somehow permit a limited use of pirated content being used in mods, so-called standalone mods, and fan-made games, provided the pirated content does not include the essentials to run the game itself. Harvesting game assets from commercial games seems to be fine. Harvesting the core game files is a different matter entirely. It truly depends on the circumstances. Next is Half-Life: Crossfire. The project claims to be a full mod made with Zash 3D engine. As I download this full mod, I discover that, well, technically, it does count as a standalone mod. Well, great. Finally, a project that is actually telling the truth about it being a standalone modification that directly requires the Half-Life game files. There is of course one critical problem. I already just said it. It is literally including the base game files from Half-Life's Valve folder. Whereas a standalone mod, arguably reliant on the uplinks demo, may be a tolerable excuse for signal lost, there is zero excuse to justify it for Crossfire. It is blatantly vanilla Half-Life files outside of legal bounds of Valve's tolerance. Since Half-Life is not abandonware, this means Andy_Show is committing piracy. This is honestly worse than mod impostorship. This is against the terms and conditions of ModDB. I can only hope that Andy fixes this ASAP and not wind up getting his mod shut down and himself banned, or better yet DMCA'd or sued by Valve. I also don't truly want to report his mod for piracy. Well, not yet, at least, so long as he is respectful and not a toxic scumbag like G Sergeant. Even if I wanted to, I can't anymore. I'll explain why near the end of the video. I also changed my password to something I cannot even remember. Now for the truly problematic matters. Here is TimeWarp, created by KamiDev. Smile. You're on camera. Motherfucker. I will be honest and probably blunt. Even before I could download this quote-unquote mod, the description on the project file does not reassure me at all that it is even a standalone mod. This is a standalone Zash-powered HL1 mod. Sounds as silly and ridiculous as some wankerzoid calling their indie game a standalone UDK-powered UT3 mod, or some other frivolous bullshit. They are not in-app purchases or gambleware, they are surprise mechanics.
Well, first, we don't call them loot boxes. What we look at as surprise mechanics.
Anyways, as soon as you download this so-called standalone mod, you will immediately see in the game files that it is in fact not a mod even by standalone standards, but in truth, an indie game powered via Zash 3D, same boat as PARANOIA 2 and all of the other Zash 3D games on IndieDB, mind you. So unfortunately, it's mod imposter slop. It is also, for once from the list of mod imposters, an original IP game, but whether it is original or fan-made literally does not matter at all. The game's city demo itself was actually very fun to play, albeit it's somewhat too unnecessarily hard in some cases, especially that busted gas pipe area in the warehouse with the moving shipping crates. Oh, and those damn grenadiers. The graphics and art style are wonderful. Strongly reminds me of the whole Half-Life Tower mod series. As it turns out, Zinus22 is behind the artwork. I've always been a major fan of his aesthetic, especially in TWHL Tower, Source. This has great potential to thrive very easily on its own on IndieDB and the annual Indie of the Year awards, so I don't see any justified reason why its creator KamiDev felt the necessity to lie to the masses by falsely mislabeling his game as a standalone mod. Regardless whether it is done deliberately or unwittingly out of misunderstanding or lackluster knowledge on the fundamentals of what makes an indie game versus what makes a modification. Dear Void, here comes the final boss. The worst of the worst. Diffusion. Created by unethical. Had this released in the 2000s or the 2010s, anyone with common sense will easily be far too skeptical to assume that Diffusion is truly a mod, let alone a total conversion one, the moment they read this particular phrase in the description on the project's ModDB page. Anyone with common sense will easily know that the project is, in fact, not a standalone total conversion modification, that is, running on the Zash 3D FWGS engine. Yes, even in 2025 this is still possible if you have any common sense skills. just because you are using assets from the Gold Source SDK, which is just another way of saying this project is fan-made, does not excuse the underlying fact that you have still used Zash3D FWGS to create a standalone indie game product. And as I said with Kamidev's TimeWarp, regardless whether it is done deliberately or unwittingly out of misunderstanding or lackluster knowledge on the fundamentals of what makes an indie game versus what makes a modification, even the way the game runs will give that away. Many others, including myself, have already tried to reason with the developer Eneko about this problem, one way or another, all of course, to no avail. He doesn't listen to reason. He did not even bother to completely read all of my responses. As I would later find out, he skimmed through some of them. He is completely biased, and considering how suddenly my comment got buried as quickly as he responded to my comment on the Accolade article, he is also bigoted. He also doesn't like criticism all that much when it comes to project fundamentals, or even just with a low overall rating of the game. His fans, however, would become much more asshole than even Eneko himself, and they demonstrated it with their dislike-bombing tirade on my comment ranting about the abject, embarrassing insanity and travesty that is the 2025 MOTY Awards. There is a special type of illness I have particularly discovered with the Diffusion game fandom. It is unlike any ordinary zealotry of fandoms, even worse than Halo's toxic fandom, be it from Bungie or 343 Industries, and perhaps about as bad, if not worse than as that of the ID Tech games specifically do. In fact, when it comes to the Half-Life fans in general, meaning not all of the fans, there are exceptions, just most of them, they have become extremely overzealous with anything that even remotely relates to the orange man in a special hazard suit, his friends, co-workers, enemies, and even the environment of which they tend to associate or relate to. Almost every Half-Life mod or fan project is almost always guaranteed praise, dance, and chant by these fans, as if it is the second arrival of Jesus H. Christ, or I guess the one free man himself. This is especially proven to be the case with these annual Mod of the Year awards. Each year it's most likely mods that rely upon the Half-Life series games that tend to artificially garner the best chances to win in the top 10 awards, at least with player's choice. This is no ordinary coincidence. According to Scott Reismanis himself, Half-Life was the very first game they featured as a vehicle for mod support on ModDB since its foundation in June 2002. These are not my own words. Go ask the users on the site who chronically complain about the biases annually. I tend to read them each year to the point of it being cliché. Yet they do nonetheless have a valid point. Anyways, the actual point I am trying to make is that Half-Life fans, short of a select few, rarely know how to accept and tolerate criticism anymore. To be fair, they truly did that well even in the 2000s and 2010s, but at least back then, they still retain a decent level of rationality most of the time. Short of the ableist scum who just love spamming that disgusting assler against others or worse. However, now in this decade, rationality is almost never the case anymore. Whenever you try to reason common sense to them that this game, Diffusion, and other games like it are literally and obviously not modifications for Half-Life, despite whatever history or original the Zash3D FWGS engine had, they start acting warp psychotic bonkers about it. Some of them would either just double dip into self-deranged denial, pretending and overhyping the game as the supreme mod of all time and demand it has its own, specially decorated position. Others would just get all whiny and quadruple down in being a toxic raging scumbag, pretending to speak absolutely for everyone on how much they do not care about logic, common sense, and reason whatsoever. For a damn. This decade is total brain rot. So for the sake of my sanity and quelling my anger of social idiocy, let's just move on. Please. Anyways, I did actually play through the Diffusion video game last year in December 2025, and on its own, it was actually pretty decent. The graphics itself are quite pristine, at least by Zash3D indie game standards. I never see much Zash3D games that have particularly reflective water shaders, for instance. Usually they are just reflective yet feel somewhat faint. Maybe it is just due to the electricity effects in the game. There is a unique design in this project. The lighting effects, how the suit functions. I especially favor health regeneration in games. It is an underrated feature that still faces too much backlash than it even deserves. The triviality of this game are the weapons. They are of variable combat effectiveness and quality. Some like the Desert Eagle, shotgun, and SMG are quite useful and reliable, whereas others like the sniper rifle, and especially the RPG launcher are a piss poor nuisance to use. I also do not like the vehicle system in that game. While I admire the driving segment of the level, it was also the hardest and most tedious for me, to the point where I ultimately got frustrated and just quit the game. Normally, I would just take a break and try again when I am ready, which is what I usually do with Half-Life mods, 3D indie games, and pretty much nearly any mod or game in general. However, because of my constant frustration with the blatant cheating and derangement of almost every Half-Life fan pretending that this is somehow a mod, my motivation to care enough to play this thing through evaporated. In fact, I do not normally play mod imposter slop. I never had in the previous years. I never dared to touch Reforged ever since their cheating escapades in 2021. I never cared to play Half-Life Beyond in 2022 ever since my toxic experience with its developer Game Sergeant. I am sure these games may actually be good in regards to gameplay. But this usually matters not to me since both of those titles are not only blatant cheaters, but their respective developers are also toxic asshats. At least with the Diffusion developer, he was not a censorious scumbag like Game Sergeant or Red Ardy were. He was just unwilling to comprehend reason and rationality with his actions in developing and properly representing his game, literally mistaking it as a mod, and it does not help that bad people surround him to enforce this toxic positivity epidemic. As much as I like to believe in hate/dislike the creator, not the creation, I do have limitations. It is much more difficult to overlook a bad or evil creator when they are very censorious. This applies to indie games where their devs desperately want to pretend that their projects being mods and will tolerate no one who exposes the truth otherwise. If the developer is a censorious asshole, I don't care how great their game is. I want nothing to do with them or their projects. This is why it is so easy for me to dismiss and avoid most newer games of this decade. Indie games, AA, AAA, present and future, now all of them. Especially so if they are exclusively on Steam. I would instead rather play either the games I developed or older good old games from the past in my backlog. This is why it is becoming easier for me to avoid playing most mods in this decade, tech games, Valve games, now, including Half-Life. This is why I would rather just play either older mods that have not been polluted by later millennialism, or just play mods reliant on the Unreal franchise. At least the communities there are far less toxic than the Half-Life, Doom, Halo, or Warhammer 40k communities. Most of all, the Unreal fandom also still have their marbles, short of few outliers. Not just in understanding fundamentals between mods and games, but also they know how to respect users and they usually can handle criticism. They do not engage so viciously in cancel cultures to silence those who offend them. Speaking of which, here is my final problem with the Diffusion fans, and by extension Half-Life fans. On the Half-Life side, apparently many of them hate generative AI. Matters not whether it is even under their unrealistic ethical guidelines, which is already precisely my case. As soon as they so much hear a peep from something they merely think, not even know, stems from 11 Labs, they cry a hissy fit about it, and slander or libel an entire creative work of art just on the mere suspicion that it features GI. Forget verification or due process. If they think it has GAI, it's evil, period. In fact, I bet many of these Luddites are probably too weak to even watch through this video just because of the mere sense of a certain narrating AIG voice. Which I guess honestly works for me. I obviously did not make this video for those lot after all, it was made for the rest of the gaming world and any audience brave and patient enough to actually listen to what I have to say all the way through, and not sneer and click away at the very first perceived sign of offense. The Half-Life community, and probably many modding communities at this point, for all I know, are riddled with overzealous cultists whom are members of the Neo-Luddite movement, and consequently are likely deranged and full of evil, enough to terrorize any beautiful work of art they deem is AI slop. Even against their own people. Half-Life, Insecure, a legitimate modification for Half-Life, as zealously attacked, the mod was review bombed, and its mod dev subjugated by the hateful, bigoted zealots and crazy people who pretend to care about artistic creativity. Yet here is the most critical irony. Diffusion, a fake mod that is obviously an indie game in disguise, and not even a good one, is being evangelically praised, despite originally featuring GAI all in the previous year and up to last month. So apparently, with all of the disgusting hatred you guys have demonstrated against Insecure, you will somehow pretend it is completely or mostly tolerable for the Diffusion indie game. This is what I originally meant about the Half-Life fans, and most especially the Diffusion fan kids, exhibiting sheer, hypocritical, brainwashed cult-like insanity and derangement. I admit, this utterly surprised me. In my days dealing with the zealots from the Neo-Luddite movement, they usually never compromise for anything GI related, even if they once loved it so much. I have seen legends of decades ago turn into the most hated pariahs, all because they dared to give GI content the slightest chance. Like Common Works. All he did was borrow a GI thumbnail in a hurry to crunch with time for one of his videos, which was otherwise all manually created without any AI assistance. His fans did not care. They cried wolf and shrieked so hard as if they were summoning agents from hell to teleport to his home to viciously and brutally murder him, harvest his organs, burn his home into cinder and ash, then teleport back into hell to sell them to demon organ donators. But I guess Diffusion's AI-generated voice acting is totally fine with at least most of you lot. It's like these folks don't even truly care about GI and are just virtue signaling. They are just pretending to care for social status points. As for myself, those who know of me and this channel may of course probably already know that I absolutely love Diffusion's AIG voice acting. It is one of the best features to happen in that game. All of which are even copyright safe stock voices. Mind you, for a fan-inspired indie game, copyright safe shouldn't necessarily matter anyway, as long as they don't salvage from other mod or fan creators and their voices, I guess. If it's something like TF2 Soldier or Alex Vance's voice, then it should be fair game, since it is literally a Valve game-inspired fan project after all. Even the star actors of Valve games, Ellen McLean and John Patrick Lowry, both voiced their major support to generative AI. In stark contrast against the very fans who have been supporting them, praying to them, or even stroking their genitals to them for decades. If even Valve star actors love GAI, what stops you from giving the tech a damn break? At least when it comes to non-commercial indie games and mods. Honestly, I miss the glorious days of 15 AI, when Team Fortress 2 voices were dominating the online television sector. I miss them, damn it. Unfortunately, with the latest update, version 1.1, all of that beautiful AIG voice work has been eradicated. Not even preserved as a backup to fallback option in the game settings for those few, including Eineko himself, who care about AIG voices. Although the project supports a mod appendage feature mode for Steam version of Half-Life, meaning it can finally be played as a true modification, the project however still can be run as a standalone game. Worse, for the Linux build, it must be run standalone. This is still not what I was asking for, Eineko. You should just remove the standalone feature entirely, or create an IndieDB page for the standalone version of Diffusion and upload that over there instead. At least then, this fiasco ordeal would be resolved and my ire with this project would cease to exist. Before I wrap this video, there are a few outliers in modding. There are some projects that can count understandably as standalone mods when accounting for abandonware, be it lost builds of games or established games that have aged for nearly a decade, 8 years at least, and is no longer being sold commercially, or even games being officially granted express permission for free distribution. I am not entirely dismissive of standalone mods, but only when these certain conditions apply. These are the true differences that define standalone modding. There are not a million aspects to this, but there is a certain degree of them. Knowing how to determine a proper mod and a game shouldn't be rocket science or college geometry. It should be an easy principle for anyone to understand and withhold, even elementary-age children. But sadly, I lost any faith that this would change for the better. I have been talking with the moderators and admin interns for years about this ongoing problem of quality control, where too many games are being released as mods with total impunity. I have highlighted these problems in advance before any major damage to happen. No matter how much I tried to reason with them, it was all for naught. Even Scott Reismanis, one of the two founders of DBolical, both of whom were the two most pragmatic and responsible minds of DBolical's entire history, and the last remaining founder left still running DBolical, for the first time in my personal experience, would not listen to reason. Although he would respond to feedback and make assurances of change and improvement, it almost never happens, short of correcting the Half-Life Beyond problem or some peculiar circumstances, like headlining two of my projects for some reason, the latter of which I honestly did not even ask for. Not to be ungrateful for it, I mean. Thank you, mate, I appreciate it. But by that point, I had already lost faith in both my previous projects that were being services on the site and the DBolical website, and no longer care to contribute to it at all anymore. Army Men Mod, Call of Duty would be my final contribution to the slopfest that is ModDB. Overall, I am already convinced that no matter how much people like myself rant and complain about it, nothing will ever truly change or improve on an old and dying website whence its staff are often too slothful to give a damn. Many users have stressed this key problem with DBolical and their twin websites, especially the ModDB side, and that fact still shines brightest to this day. You may be thinking, if I don't like the way ModDB runs their site, just make a new one yourself and run it your way. I did consider just making my own mod/game repository service instead, since the growing narcissistic insanity of the old ones, ModDB and Nexus Mods to name the worst offenders, are just everywhere, growing out of control with impunity. And while I did have plans to establish my own online store that is also very mod friendly, a plan I've always had since the 2010s, I would later discover just how very difficult it can be to host and maintain online storage just to transfer and preserve almost every legitimate mod that exists on the internet, in addition to allowing and moderating newer ones. It will be tremendously difficult for me to manage, and I also don't know who I can talk to or trust for the job anymore. Even the only two I did knew who could help me achieve this goal, both died. One killed himself in 2020, I found that out 4 years later in 2024, and the other died from lung disease caused from COVID-19 in 2021. So I am honestly at a loss on how to go about starting an online service that sells games and harbors mods, let alone one that can compete against the likes of Valve, Steam, CD Projekt GOG, or even Epic Games Store. Until that changes, all I can contend with as an alternative is to take my chances with each and their mod hosting feature. Fortunately, thus far, that endeavor has been doing quite well. Not just for myself, but many other modders who watched my earlier video on mod alternatives and ultimately followed the each route, since all of the other options either went dry, proved to be a dead end or trap, or flatlined. I used to care for ModDB. I wanted to care and help this site improve and grow. I even offered my services to DBolical, employing me to help maintain the ethics and integrity of the website, and hopefully also modernize it to match with the later millennial times, and in a way that does not compromise their social and political integrity, at the expense of our right to creativity, like that abusive clownfest that is Nexus Mods. But in the end, I was only wasting my time. I wasted my time caring for a site, staff, and community who do not want to be ethical, sane, or respectful to creative barriers and fundamentals. None of them even want to care. They just want to be toxic. So on January 1st, 2026, I stopped caring. I've digitally packed my things and left ModDB, and this time, I am not coming back to that cesspit ever again. It matters not if DBolical suddenly and finally start changing for the better later. I still don't want to ever deal with the toxicity of this community again, especially the diffusion whack jobs. I cannot trust DBolical staff or community to ever be faithful in ethics anymore. They have zero ethics and logic in modding. Ethics in modding is lost. ModDB is lost. I will settle for each instead. That is where you will find me if you want to discuss games or mods with me. This is where you will find the latest version of my mods and games. That is where I will stay probably forever. That is all for this video. I cannot fit everything in here for it is already long enough as it is. If you want to see the extra bits, the deleted scenes, and you have the heart and mind to handle the harshness and vulgarity, just watch the explicit version on Rumble. State your feedback in the comments. If you know of any mod site that can work properly, and ones that are not a broken mess that's difficult to work with, let me know in the comments. Even if you know how to work around any with a budge system, then show me how to properly work around it. You can just contact me by joining my Revolt server and screenshot guide me through it if you want. Would make life much easier if you did that. Otherwise, if you are some irrational-minded and overzealous, devout Neo-Luddite or some other member of the No AI movement watching this video, then do yourself a favor, spare me your bloody hate comment. Just click away from this video and forget I ever existed. Ranting about GAI and how utterly evil it is and I am for using it, here is a total waste of time. You will just be hidden from the channel, usually without warning or notice.